how to study fights, how to study a fighter, and what to look for when you're studying, because I know a lot of people don't really know exactly what it is that they're even looking for when they're studying a fight. So before we get into it, I'm just going to explain why it's important to study fights. So the weight of the situation is this. You need to treat fighting just like you would treat anything else. If you go to school to learn how to be a doctor, to learn how to be a nurse, to learn how to, be an engineer, whatever the craft is, when you go to school for these things, you take it seriously. You study for hours and hours and hours, hundreds and hundreds of hours. You're spending thousands of dollars on colleges. You're going through all these hoops and hurdles in order to graduate and get some kind of degree. Well, 9 times out of 10, most of these career paths don't put your life on the line the way fighting does. So if you're going to be doing all this work and putting in all this effort to learn how to do your craft in all these other fields, why would you not put in that same kind of effort to learn how to fight in a field where you could die in the ring? You could literally lose your life. So many people have lost their lives fighting. We talk about it like it's fun and games, but when you get in that ring, it's a fight. It's not a game. You play basketball, football, and all these other things. But MMA and boxing, these are serious sports. So we need to take them serious and study for them the way that you would for anything else that was important. That's why we're going to talk about how to study fighters here. Here's what we're going to do. First thing we need to go over is when you're studying fighters, you got 2 types of things you want to study. You can either study a technique or you can study a fighter. When you're studying a fighter, what you want to do is you gotta think about it like this, right? When you're studying a fighter, you need to know what they're doing and why they're doing it. What they're doing is half the battle. Whether they throw a lot of jabs, crosses, whether they shoot a lot of takedowns, the head movement that they use, the defensive styles that they use, all that stuff is fun, it's fine and dandy. But more important than the techniques that they're using is why they're using it, when they're using it, how they're using it. Because it doesn't really matter if your opponent throws a lot of jabs if you don't know why. How does it help you to know that your opponent does slip hooks a lot? Do you know how he's using it? Do you know why he's using it? You need to know these things when you're watching a fighter. 2 things to look out for when you're studying a fighter is what they're doing, the techniques they're using, and why they're using them. The techniques that they're using and what they're doing doesn't mean anything to you until you know what, who, when, why, where. Now let's get into it, right? So let's say you're studying a fighter, for example. We're just gonna say we're studying Johnny, right? When you're studying Johnny, you need to understand who he's fighting, right? You need to look at the matchup when you're studying fighters. So the matchup is defensive fighter versus another defensive fighter. It's counter fighter versus volume fighter. It's, walk forward pressure fighter versus heavy mover, right? He's a defensive fighter. You need to know the styles of the people that you're watching, because the 2 styles that you're watching is going to tell you what kind of fight you're looking at and why the person that you're studying is doing what he's doing. For example, let's say you're watching a fight with Ilia Topuria, right? He's kind of like a pressure fighter who moves back defensively when his opponent attacks him. So now you need to figure out, who is he fighting against? Is he fighting against another pressure fighter? Is he fighting against a mover? Who is it that he's fighting against, and why is it that he's doing what he's doing when he's fighting that person? Once you identify both the styles of fighters, now you can move from there and say, okay, now everything that this person that I'm studying is doing is based on the fact that he's fighting X type of fighter. Everything that fighter A is doing is based on the fact that he's fighting defensive fighter B. So now, okay, let's go into the fight and watch what he does. Study what he does based on that guy, right? So now he's working his jab. Okay, he's working his jab, but how does he use it against this defensive type of moving fighter? If the fighter was a pressure fighter, he's using his jab, but how does he use it against a pressure fighter? That's how it makes it easier for you to understand what's going on when you know the styles that you see fighting, because styles make fights at the end of the day. Just be aware of that. When you're watching a fight, you're watching 2 styles. Why are they doing what they're doing based on the style that they're fighting? And then what you want to do is, if you're studying this fighter, okay, now you see how he handles defensive fighters. Now let's watch fights where he fights other offensive fighters or volume punchers, or he's fighting an aggressive fighter, a counter fighter. Let's see how he responds to these fighters. Then you can really start to understand what makes fighter A tick based on how he treats all these different styles of fights. Does that make sense? A few things that you can look for when identifying a style is this. You can look for, is his style defensive orientated or offensive orientated? Does he make most of his decisions based on keeping himself safe, or does he make most of his decisions based on attacking his opponent? Does he fight to stay in the middle of the ring? Does he not care to hold the middle of the ring? Is he comfortable moving around the ring? Does he like to counter his opponent's strikes, or does he like to just defend his opponent's strikes? Or does he just like to get his lick back after his opponent strikes? You even have opponents who just always have an answer. So an answer is a little bit different than a counter, because an answer is more like, every time you hit me, I got something to say back. It's not really like a counter though, because a counter is usually like a slip two, or an answer is like, I'm just going to do anything. When you swing at me, I'm just going to do anything. An answer fighter would be somebody like Belal. When you watch JDM versus Belal Muhammad in the UFC, 170 pounds, you'll see how Belal always has something to say after JDM attacks him. He's what you call an answer fighter. A counter fighter is somebody like Conor McGregor, who's looking for you to do something so he can counter you. It's two different things right there. So, yeah, is he an answer fighter? What type of fighter is he? What's some other things? Oh, here's another thing. What you want to really, really, really pay attention to as well is, after you see the kind of styles, you need to look at the defensive styles. Everyone has a defensive style, and your defensive style is more important than your offensive style. This is why, right? When I judge a fighter, I don't judge a fighter by their offense. I judge them by their defense. I know exactly how good a fighter is by how well they can defend me. If I'm sparring someone and I land my jab super easily, I don't care what kind of offense he has, because I know my defense is good. I got this guy in the bag. But when I throw my jab and I don't find him that easily, I'm like, okay, I got to watch out for this dude, because I know he's a cerebral fighter. He's not going to just let me go in there and punch on him, right? So what you want to look for after you find the styles, because regardless of what style you fight in, you also have a defensive style. You could be a volume puncher who moves his head as he moves forward, throwing volume. You could be a volume puncher who just stands there like a robot throwing punches and doesn't care if he gets hit back. You could be a volume puncher who blocks a lot, just always blocking as you move forward. You could be a volume puncher who counters a lot, like whatever. It doesn't matter. But the point is that one style can have 10 different defensive styles. Every single style has different defensive styles. You could be a defensive fighter who moves his feet and blocks. You could be a defensive fighter who moves his feet and moves his head. You could be a defensive fighter who doesn't move his feet. He just stands there and defends, right? So you got to pay attention to what kind of defensive style the person is using. Then you can also say, okay, fighter A is fighting the way he's fighting because fighter B has this type of style of defense. He's a pressure fighter who uses head movement. He's a back foot fighter who uses blocking. Now, fighter A is using what he's using based on those things. You got to take those into consideration. Let's review really fast. You got styles, right? And then you have defensive styles that goes under that. Defensive styles. How is the person that you're watching dealing with this defensive style? Super important, super key. So now, here's another thing to look for. When you're studying a fighter, do they make adjustments, right? So maybe the person that you're watching, fighter A, he goes into the fight and he's able to handle fighter B really easily. So he doesn't even really have to make adjustments. But maybe fighter A goes into the fight with a game plan, but that game plan is not working out the way he thought it was going to work. So then, does fighter A make adjustments? And if he does make adjustments, what adjustments does he make? So from round 1 to round 2, does fighter A fight differently? If he fights differently, that's super key to pick up on, because now you're going to learn a lesson. Okay, based on what he was going through, he made this adjustment. He went out in round 1, he was working his jab. Fighter B started countering his jab. He comes out in round 2 and he starts adding feints before his jab. Fighter B doesn't have an answer to that. Or fighter B adjusts to that and starts blitzing him before he could even get his feint off. I don't know anything. Does he go and, back in round 2 to 3, does he adjust again? Like, we're looking for those small little micro adjustments that happens during the fight. That's super key, because you can learn on the fly. What is the guy that you're studying doing to adjust to his opponent's style? Boom, those are free lessons. Whatever he uses to adjust, now you know it. Okay, so those are going to be like the overviews on like how to study fighters. So now we're going to move past just how to study fighters, and we're going to look at how to study techniques. All right. So when you're studying a technique, you want to think about it like this, right? So there's multiple ways that you can study a technique. But before we talk about how to study a technique, we got to learn why we should study techniques, right? So I'm a firm believer in believing in the stuff that you're using, right? So whenever I'm teaching a technique to my clients in person or in my online program, I want them to understand not only what they're doing, but why they're doing it, because the why gives you the faith and the conviction behind using it. If you just walk in and your coach just tells you, oh, okay, today we're doing 10 jabs, we're doing, 50 kicks, and gives you a list of things to do and doesn't explain why you're doing it, you're going to be like, okay, I'll do it, but like, why? Why should I do it? At the end of the day, you're only going to use the things that you believe in and have conviction behind. So I want to get you to believe in the technique that I'm showing you. If I can get you to believe in the technique that I'm showing you, Even if I don't train you anymore, even if me and you stop being friends, whatever happens, you're still going to be using that same technique. And not only are you going to be using it, you're going to be showing other people how to use it and explaining to other people why they should use it, right? I just basically converted you into being a fainter. Now you always faint and you teach other people how to faint. See what I'm saying? The reason why you want to have this faith in your techniques is because you're going to use the technique with more conviction, more passion. When you throw that jab, it's going to be stiff. Like, now really can I believe in this jab? You know what I'm saying? As opposed to like, a jab? Does this work? Like, you don't really even believe in the move that you're using. You have to believe in the techniques that you're using. So what you want to do is you want to find evidence of the techniques that you're using working in actual fights. I look at it like this, right? I'm a Christian and I believe the Bible is the word of God, and all the things that I do in my life, I try to base it on the Bible. Now, you might not be a Christian, you might be a different religion, you might be whatever, but there should be something that you kind of like base the things that you do on. When it comes to fighting, footage is Bible. When it comes to fighting, whatever you see happen in actual footage is real. It's truth. It happened. It's there. It's reality. If somebody shows you a technique and you say, show me where that happened, and they can't show you, it's not real. It hasn't happened. Like, you need proof, and the evidence of the things that you're doing is only going to be found in footage. So that's what I like to do is I show you what to do, and hey, here's a person that did it. Hey, I did it. Hey, somebody did it in at least a sparring footage, anything. Somebody did it in a street fight. There's footage of someone doing it. Footage in this situation would be like Bible. So what we're going to do is now we're going to go find footage on the technique that we want to learn being used. So how did we get inspiration? Say you saw somebody use a technique in a fight. If you saw somebody use a technique in a fight, easy. Now you know that guy uses that technique, so you can just go find more of his fights where he's using that technique. So now what you want to look for is when he uses that technique, who, what, when, why, where. When the person you're studying is using a technique, you need to know why he's using it, who he's using it against. Is he using it against a pressure fighter? What's the style of the person that he's using it against? Is he using it against a defensive fighter, a counter fighter? Who's he using it against? Or does he just use it against everyone, but switches up how he uses it based on the style of person that he's fighting against? So now we know the who, what, when, why, and where behind the technique. Now what we can do is we can find other people who use that same technique, right? So fighter A uses a technique. He uses it like this against all these different styles of fighters. Okay, let's see if we can find fighter B. How does he use it? How does he use it against all these different types of fighters? And then even past looking at when, who, what, when, why, and where that they use this technique, you could even look at what happens when that technique fails. Why does the technique that you're looking for fail? It failed against fighter B for what reason? Was it a timing thing? Was it because he was just tired and so it wasn't as effective anymore? Is it like a clear, obvious counter that works against this? You need to know these things because if you're going to be using a technique, you need to know how somebody can possibly counter you or stop it from working. You need to know who, what, when, why, and where a technique works. And then you also need to know how does it fail? How do you beat that technique so it doesn't work against you and so that your opponent can't stop you when you use it against him? That's pretty much how I study fighters. I like to look at the styles that are fighting, the who's, the what's, the when's, the why, the where's. And then if I'm looking for a technique, I'm looking at who they used it against, what kind of style, why did it work, why did it not work. And let me see if I can think of anything else. For the most part, that's pretty much it though. And if I can't find the technique, here's another thing. If I can't find the technique that I'm looking for, I'll try to find somebody who I assume would do something like that. And I'll just kind of scour fights until I can find it. Like if I can't find somebody who uses a catch and a catch hook, I'm just going to think what kind of fighter uses this? A pressure fighter might use that style. A pressure fighter might use the catch hook. Okay, so let me find some pressure fighters and see if I can find it in any of these fights until I find it. And then when I find it, then I just go back down the list I told you guys about a second ago. I'll take a couple of questions before I hop off though. I just want to give you guys a quick little lesson. A man said, what's the next fight you're looking forward to? Easy. The next fight I'm looking forward to the most right now is definitely going to be Khamzat Chimaev versus DDP. Those styles are just electric, right? You got Khamzat Chimaev who comes forward like a mad dog out of looking for a bomb. And then you have DDP who's just like mindless and has no off button, just comes forward the whole time swinging and just, you don't know what he's going to do. You don't know what he's going to do because he doesn't know what he's going to do. So of course you don't know what he's going to do. So how is that going to clash, right? You got the Khamzat who's crazy and strong and super gritty. And then you got DDP who has 5-round cardio, never gets tired. Khamzat does get tired, but Khamzat's not quite as strong. What are the names we should study? Best defensive style, best offensive style, footwork. Who should we study? I mean, it just depends. It depends. Like, if I'm looking for, like, defense, I'm watching people like Floyd Mayweather, I'm watching Shakur Stevenson, Devin Haney. I'm watching Tank Davis. You know, usually if I'm looking for defense, I'll be honest. When I'm looking for a defensive fighter so I can study some defensive tactics, footworks, counters, blocking, I'm gonna watch boxing like all day because in MMA you do see good defense and stuff like that, but it's usually not like a staple in most fighters' game. Whereas in boxing, you can find a lot of fighters who their whole game is revolved around being defensive. So if I'm going to study defense, definitely watching a boxing fight. And there's scores of people who use good defense in boxing. Whereas in MMA, most people are offensive minded, with some being more defensive. Like in this, Israel Adesanya has good footwork and good defense. Max Holloway has decent defense, uses really good footwork though. Ilya Topuria has good defense, but none of their styles are like, you can't really find styles that revolve around defense in MMA. So if I'm looking for defense, definitely studying boxing. And then for like an offensive pressure style, I'll study boxing or MMA. For that one, it doesn't matter. You could pick out of the bunch. Right? Who are the best fighters we should study? I mean, that's gonna be biased based on who you are, right? Like, here's the thing. I'm a defensive fighter, so of course I love defensive fighters. But if you're more of an aggressive fighter, you probably want to study more aggressive type of fighters. But it's important to understand what kind of fighter you are. Don't try to be something that you're not. If you're a defensive fighter, lean into that. Study fighters like that. If you're an offensive fighter, you should lean into that. I'm not saying be a moron on how to defend yourself, but you should lean into it just because that's your strong suit, right? And make sure your defense is as good as it can be. Like, don't forsake that, but like lean into what is going to take you the furthest because it's who you are naturally.